Hey everyone, it's Barb Egan coming to you on our YouTube live today on a Monday up in Kelowna, British Columbia. It is a rainy June summer day, but that's okay. Sometimes the rain is cozy, so that's all right. And wherever you're joining us from, welcome. Thank you for joining us live or listening to this recorded. And we just love interacting with you. It's so much fun. If you haven't been here before, so I'm Barb and I'm a registered clinical counselor. I own a counseling clinic here in Kelowna and work all over BC and Canada and the US. And I love doing these. These are so fun. And on today's topic, we're going to talk about boundaries. So, really breaking that huge, big topic down into 5 tips: how to set them, how to enforce them. So, 5 tips to set and enforce boundaries. And this is a really hot topic. So, in my clinic, I have a team of 6 therapists that work with me. I'm also a clinical supervisor with University of British Columbia, so one of the major universities in the world. And we see this all the time. So I see a lot of graduate students who are in their counseling psychology program or masters of social work. I see a lot of students, I see a lot of professionals, I see a lot of all sorts of things. But in that kind of teaching sphere, we teach boundaries with our clinicians or people who are already licensed practicing therapists or registered clinical counselors, or those graduate students who are just a few months away from becoming them. And boundaries is always the biggest topic, not only with helping professionals like myself, but with our clients. And they always come up because no one is born into the world with perfect boundaries and a perfect family. And that can be hard to say. I'm a mom, I have 3 kids, and our family's not perfect. I didn't come from a perfect family. No pressure, because nobody does. And it's where on the spectrum. And we often learn boundaries in our family of origin. And if our family of origin didn't really have any, tools of how to practice boundaries, of to say, oh, this is a no for me. Or if I say yes to this, even though I don't really want to, I'm not honoring myself. I'm just people pleasing, or I'm giving in to you. And it's just those people who say yes, 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 yes. Or maybe the opposite. And your family was very, no, 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 you can't do anything. It was very authoritative, very controlling. And so boundaries are these really morphing things. And I think they look different in different seasons. So we're going to really unpack quite a bit of it. So we're going to go over just those 5 tips, like break it down, 5 tips, how to set them, how to enforce them, because that can be really hard. I mean, even just getting curious about boundaries or how to set them is scary enough, but then enforcing them sounds really uncomfortable. And then we're also going to go under, hey, why is it important to set boundaries? I think understanding the why, that you deserve it, that in fact it's there to protect you, is really, really beneficial. And healthy people will hear your boundary. And even if they don't agree with it or don't love it, they're going to say, you know what, I respect you for having a boundary. And unhealthy people are not going to like your boundary. It does not mean your boundary is wrong. It, in fact, just means that it doesn't serve them. And as humans, we can sometimes be selfish. So oftentimes, though, we misinterpret that as, ooh, my boundaries are wrong, or I shouldn't have boundaries, or boundaries are harsh and mean. And that's not the case. We're also going to go over what types of boundaries are there. There's lots of types. There's not just between, oftentimes, so like I said, I'm a clinical supervisor with UBC, a big university, see a lot of graduate students as therapists who in training, who then see all these students at the big university. We see so much boundary work because it's the first time these students are moving away from home, or just finding a part of themselves or an identity apart from their family. So oftentimes it's like, oh, I can't have that. I would upset my parent. But we also go through, what are types of boundaries, like with your time and your studies and your work as working professionals, in relationships and friendships and romantic relationships. So there's all sorts of different types of boundaries, including with our time, but also physical too. Like we're physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, all sorts of types of beings. So there's all sorts of types of boundaries. And I think they look different in different seasons too. So it's not necessarily etched in stone. It can be in sand. We look at what are barriers for boundaries? Like, why is it hard to set them? Because it is hard. And bottom line, it is hard to set them. And that's why counseling can be really good, or things like this, where you can have honest conversations and see, actually, these are really hard to do, and that's okay. But again, just because it's hard or someone doesn't like your boundary doesn't mean that your boundary is bad or you having boundaries is bad. It just means it doesn't serve that person. And then we're going to look at what are healthy boundaries, what are unhealthy boundaries, and kind of get some actual practical examples to sit into your life. So I'm excited for this. This is a topic that we could do a whole series on. So if you have questions throughout, please type in the chat box. It is so fun to be interactive with y'all. So please engage, ask questions here, contact us afterwards if there's more too, and we can always add to this. And so to kind of kick it off and welcome you in, I would just love to hear, what is the first word that comes to mind when you hear boundaries? What is the first word that comes to mind when you hear the word boundaries? So for me, to be honest, probably just what I grew up thinking them as, harsh. And I'll even add that in there. Doesn't mean that's true, but I'm just saying, what is a first word, or what do you think about when you hear boundaries? Oh, Jennifer says mom. That's a huge one. And again, working in that university setting a lot, we often see that in particular of mom or parent, but mom's a big one. Difficult, Janet says, yes. Boundaries are difficult to set and enforce. Not being a doormat. Yes, Amit. That's a good one. Because sometimes the easiest thing is to say yes, even though we mean no. And that's usually a good indicator that a boundary's been crossed. Is we say yes, but your heart inside is really saying no. And then there's some internal tension, which can cause anxiety and stress. Sarah, healthy limits. Yeah, just knowing that they're healthy. I think that's really important, is that they're a limit. Yeah. That we don't have to go and go and go and go and go and go and go with our time, our energy, or resource. Or it's like that friend who answers that call all the time. It's like, maybe the most loving thing you could do is actually draw a boundary and say, I really care about you and I can't be your go-to person. I really encourage you to get professional help or counseling. And if you have done it too, if even just using your vulnerability as strength here to say, hey, counseling has really helped me, or this video, or this book, or this YouTube, resources are really powerful in this situation too. Let's hear some others. Taking on too much, Sarah. Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. This is mine. It's like, yes, I can do that. Oh, yes, I want to do that. And oftentimes it's good things too. It's taking on too much. And I had a wise mentor tell me every yes has a no. So when I say yes to this in this season of my life, I do have to say no to other things in my life too. Like saying a practical example, let's say a lot of people want to get up earlier and exercise and all of that, but they're so tired because it's actually really hard to do. And you have to go to work, or you have kids, or you have other responsibilities. So it's one example is when I say yes to the gym, I'm saying no to sleep. I'm saying no to evening snacking, or no to late TV. And so every yes has an accompanying no too. And I think there's different seasons for those. So that's a really good one. Okay, let's see. What are some other ones? Good. Lots are coming in. Let's see, Sarah, I'm struggling with helping my teens setting healthy boundaries. Yes. And again, there's different boundaries for different stages of life. And it's really hard as a parent to let your children make their own, or help coach them in that, guide them in that. And I think there's a lot of really great resources. Dr. Henry Cloud is probably like the foremost expert on boundaries. He literally wrote a book called Boundaries. It's It's probably like the most popular psychology book out there, but there's a lot of good books out there on boundaries because, again, this is such an important topic and one that none of us are perfect at. Psychology Today has a lot of good articles too, Henry Cloud's website and podcast. All sorts of the Better Boundaries workbook is a really good one too. I love that because there are different seasons, like when we're a parent of little kids or single or in a relationship or with teens or adult children, like these actually morph and change. They're written not in stone, but often sand. Kristen, no. And no is a full sentence. No is a complete answer. And oftentimes when we are over justifying, that's when a boundary's been crossed or our people pleaser instinct is kicked in. And so I just encourage you to pay attention to that. Like if you're noticing yourself over justifying, over explaining your answer of why you can't come to this family dinner, maybe something's been triggered or crossed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to pull up, these are also great. Thank you. I love just hearing that different people resonate with different types of words too, or different types of people or seasons of life. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's represented here. So thank you for that. That's so good. I think you can see it corresponds to every phase of life that we're in and every person. Like we all have to set boundaries and they can all be really hard to set and enforce. So I'll pull up the 5 tips for setting boundaries. And so we made a diagram, take a screenshot, keep it on your phone, try to practice this throughout the week and write down in real time or reflect on the day of how you've done this. And so I encourage this for all of these because this is how we actually get the rubber to meet the road. It's one thing to make it head knowledge. It's a whole other to make it heart knowledge or hand knowledge, meaning that you're actually implementing it. So I like to write it down to actually see how I'm growing in certain things. And you have permission to grow. Like no one's perfect at this. So 5 tips for setting boundaries. Number 1, be clear about what you want. So often we get nervous that we start to, again, over-explain or, try to minimize it or apologize our way through it and give way too much detail, and you've overwhelmed and lost the person. To set an effective and enforce an effective boundary is to be confident in it, be clear in how you communicate it. And so that's really important of what that looks like. So again, let's say a simple one of, your partner is, what do you want for dinner? Oh, I don't care, whatever you want. But you don't really feel that way. You're like, we've had spaghetti and meatballs every single day, and I really don't want that. So they're about to suggest that. Just a practical, clear way to communicate that would be, we've had spaghetti and meatballs a lot lately. I would be good with anything except that, maybe like chicken of some sort, or, just giving a clear, specific example to be clear about, hey, I actually just don't want this. You don't always have to say exactly what you want either. You may not know. If you want chicken, say it. If you don't know, but you know what you don't want. You don't want spaghetti and meatballs. Say that. And so that can go to a simple example of dinner, but it could also go to a simple example of, hey, you're texting me a lot, or mom, you're texting me a lot. I'm busy between these times. I'm at work. Please don't text me during this time, but I am free, again, clear, specific, at 7:00 that you can phone me or message me and I can get back to you. But please don't do it during the work hours. Again, clear, specific. That can be really, really powerful. Number 2, be direct and don't apologize for your needs. So let's say if it's someone who is like your mom or a friend or someone who just keeps kind of crossing your boundary into your space of your time or your resource, like they want something from you up to talk or whatever, but you just don't have the capacity. They may not know that they're crossing a boundary. So you have to be direct. You have to let them know, like, I'm busy from these times. Please don't contact me then. Or if you do, I'm not going to reply. So please don't send multiple messages. It's overwhelming. If you want to talk to me, you can call at this time. And so I work a lot in postpartum, just being a mom and helping people navigate that kind of first year, especially. And that's a big one, is like people calling or messaging of things like that. And so sometimes we work on boundaries of, that's just so overwhelming for a new mom to get all those messages. For some people, nothing's wrong with that. And so getting a direct time that they can go through to say, what, that doesn't work for me, but you can phone me, at this time, or I'll call you. I don't know exactly when a good time would be, so I'll let you know. And you don't have to apologize for that. And so again, when someone else said in the chat box earlier, no, well, no is a complete answer. We don't have to over justify. So be direct. Number 3, expect resistance and don't let it deter you. So there is going to be a resistance. And I kind of equate this. Oh, I should have brought a little rubber band, but I'm trying to see if I have them. I have a hair tie. So a hair tie or a rubber band is kind of stretchy. And sometimes boundaries look like this. Sometimes they're nice and mobile and, can move a lot. Sometimes they're really stretched thin. And like, I can feel the tension. So if you have a hair tie or a rubber band, just envision that or get it. And you can do this later. But sometimes, this is my breaking point. Like, this is not, the rubber band in this is not going to go any further. And it's stretched. Like, this is a boundary. And sometimes it gets like this. And sometimes it gets like this. It's nice and loose. So there's different seasons for boundaries. Like, sometimes they're really defined and stretched and tense. Sometimes they're a little bit of both. And sometimes they're nice and loose. And so that kind of is a good picture, but expect resistance. So when this one has a lot of tension or resistance, this boundary, it's really, really tight and it's pushed as far as it can go until it breaks. That shows that this relationship has some resistance. Again, it doesn't mean that your boundary is bad, of that you can, you're not free until Friday. So please don't call me until then. That's not bad. That just means that that person wants access to you. You don't have capacity. They're an adult. They have to process through that on their own. They have to work through that. They may not like your boundary, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means it doesn't serve them. And so do expect resistance. That's okay. Don't stop. Don't cave. This is the hardest part, because it's like the people pleaser in me wants to say, yeah, sure, I can take it on, or sure, I can help you out with this, or that friend that keeps calling you to talk. Sure, yes. Oh, I just don't want anything bad to happen to them. Oh, they have no one else. Oh, I feel really bad for them. Expect some resistance when you say, look, I really care for you. And the most loving thing I can do is really suggest, to get some counseling, or, maybe not come to me as much, because I'm feeling it now. There's going to be some resistance there. They're not going to say, oh, you're right. I have been coming to you. I have been emotionally vomiting and overloading on you, and I'm so sorry. Maybe they'll get there eventually, especially if they go to some counseling. But in that moment, they're going to be annoyed because their need isn't being met. Now, their need doesn't mean that it matches your need, and you are only responsible for you. So expect some resistance, but keep going. Number 4, setting limits is an ongoing process. So again, boundaries, back to the scrunchie or rubber band analogy, it changes. It's not always going to be like this. It's not always going to be loose and easy and flowy either, like this. And so it does really change with a season of life, or in the chat box too, of what we're seeing is, hey, my teens, hey, my mom. It changes in a season of life and relationships, and it changes in your capacity too. So it's written in sand, not stone. And number 5, boundaries are for your own well-being, not to control others. So again, when I wrote in, my take on boundaries sometimes is harsh, and that's not necessarily true. Dr. Henry Cloud describes boundaries as this, it's kind of thinking like, okay, here's my lawn of my house, and I have a really nice like white picket fence outside. Now, the fence isn't to keep everybody else out and be mean and harsh and control my own little plot of land. No, boundaries are there to show you where the gate is and how to come into that in a healthy way, but not to be able to just do that in a way that's you can hop the fence anytime you want to. Another example he gives is, two houses next to each other. And so let's say my grass is really green because I water it and I mow it, and, it gets sunlight and good seed and all of that. My neighbor doesn't do any of that. It's scorched. It's like their dog goes everywhere. It's like patches. It's dying. It's yellow. It's dried up. It's withered. And so I'm out there watering my grass, and I just think, hey, I'll be really kind and I'll water theirs too. So I go over their fence, I water theirs, and, they're like, hey, that's awesome. Thank you. That's so great. Maybe they're really appreciative of it too. This is so great. And so now I'm like kind of feeling guilty. Every time I have to go out there, I have to water it. And then I see, wow, it's growing. Oh, I'm mowing my lawn. Now I got to go mow theirs. I feel bad. I've already done this much. I've already crossed into that area. Okay, I'll mow theirs too. So now I'm mowing, and then a week goes by and I'm like, oh, I got to mow my lawn again. Oh, I'm out here mowing. Now I feel bad if I don't mow their lawn. Now I got to do their lawn. Oh, I'm weeding. Oh, I'm planting my lawn. And now everything I'm doing, I feel like I have to do. I'm obligated. I'm guilt-ridden to do in theirs. Do you think that neighbor is ever going to be like, hey, I'll take over now, or I'll do yours, or let's swap? Maybe if they have healthy boundaries, but let's say that neighbor doesn't, and they don't have to do anything. They get to sit back, relax, host barbecues, and love their lawn. It's taken care of for free. And they don't have to do any of that hard work of mowing, of watering, of weeding, of planting, because I do it for them. That's unhealthy boundaries. That's me giving out of guilt, out of obligation. But that other person actually doesn't get any ownership, and it's really enabling their behavior. And so we often see that. So when you said, when someone mentions something about teens, this is often common in kids, is that we can actually enable versus teach them their own autonomy, their own boundaries, that, hey, here's my lawn. I'm responsible for me. I'm responsible for my lawn. Here's a fence. It's not to keep everybody else out. It's actually just a point. Hey, here's the gate. This is how you unlock it. This is how you come in. This is when I'm home, where you can come in. You can't come in whenever. And you have really healthy boundaries. And that's actually where you have really meaningful freedom and relationships, that you're at home with yourself because you understand, your own worth too. And then people respect you. Because if you don't respect yourself and just overgive, how can anyone respect you? And you're really teaching people how to teach you by how you treat them too. So we often with boundaries have to teach people how to treat us, what we want, because they're not mind readers. And oftentimes boundaries are crossed because the other person doesn't know that they're crossing a boundary. And that can be something in and of itself too. And so that's a big one. I'm just going to take a minute to kind of look at the chat box, and we can go on to another bit. But let's see what some people have said. Oh, Kat, my mother just told me recently that I'm trying to control everything because I wanted a choice in the day or time we got together. And I'm like, wait, what? So your boundary of, hey, this is the day and time that works well for me. Something about that seemed controlling or harsh for her. Again, if we go back to maybe her experience with boundaries, maybe we'd notice that that was her experience with boundaries. She didn't grow up in a home where boundaries were ever taught or created as a child. So we interpret that as harsh or not loving or controlling, where in fact, it actually gives you respect of, hey, you're in control of you. Your choices have consequences, or they have rewards of, hey, if you manage your time well, you get this, or you don't have to say yes to everything. There's some freedom when there's some parameters actually. And so again, when people don't like your boundary, it doesn't mean that it's controlling or harsh or that you're a control freak necessarily. It just means that that's what you've identified to fit well into your life for this season. And if they don't like that, something about that's triggered in them, they're an adult, they're responsible for dealing with that. Oh, Tiffany, my mother-in-law is overbearing. That is a big one. And again, we see a lot of these in these adult relationships with a parent or a mother-in-law and things like that. And so going through that of getting on the same page with your husband, I think is huge. Your spouse is like, okay, what can some of our boundaries be? That has to be clear to communicate them together, because it would be really hard to be in that triangle of like feeling like you're the odd one out or any of that. And so having that clear communication. Okay, we can see them X amount of times per week or per month, not X amount of time, not 3 times, or we can't call them every day, or, getting on the same page there can be really good. Danelle, what does space mean? Oof. Well, that's a good one. I think I would have to know a little bit, maybe more context here of what you're looking for, that specific definition. And that might be more of like an individual thing, but space in general, again, is very vague. It's a term we use a ton of, but space can be time. It could be physical, of, hey, I just need some space. That could be physical space. Like some people just activate our nervous system. So where do you feel it in your body? Do you feel like that? Like your chest tightens, your what do they call it? Your hands, your hands tighten to, your muscles clench, and you can almost feel yourself like pulling back. That means a boundary has been crossed. Think of it like an internal alarm clock. And that's what it's just saying, like, I've been invaded. So that's often where anger comes up. We see this a lot, is anger is often a response to a boundary that's been crossed, but maybe that person doesn't know they've crossed a boundary. So we need to be very clear, again, direct with it. We have to expect some resistance. Doesn't mean it's bad, but that's often where anger can come up from too. And so space can be physical space, like, okay, I just need to remove myself. This is really common with parenting of, hey, I'm noticing it in my body. I'm getting really overwhelmed. Mommy has to take a break right now. I can feel my heart pounding. I'm going to go take some deep breaths outside. Would you like to come with me? And if they don't, or if you need that space, you take that space for a few minutes and come back in, and you let them know, your child, that you're always going to come back in and things like that. So space can be literally physical, or it could be time with a mom or a friend that you're just saying, hey, my capacity right now, I don't have for you in the same way that you need. And I'm just going to honor that. I'm going to have to take some time, and I'll reach out when I'm ready. I've seen this be 3 years. I've seen this be 3 days. It really is so personal. There's no right or wrong answer. And I think that's, again, to have safe people in your life to really unpack this with. And that could be therapy, that could be friends, that could be, family, or just safe people in general. And again, some of these books are really, really helpful in that. So let's look up, why is it important to set boundaries? Because again, we can get caught up in it's harsh, or this person doesn't like it, but let's go back to the why. Let's go back to the why, because ultimately, what would you gain from this? Like, if you didn't have that internal alarm clock going off of, ooh, or that anxiety or that anger, what would be happening? So why is it important to set boundaries is, one, to practice self-care and self-respect. You're respecting your own needs, wants, desires. And if you can't respect yourself, well, that other person's not going to respect you. You need to teach them how to respect you. Number 2, to communicate your needs in a relationship. Otherwise, it's not a really authentic, deep relationship. We often think, and especially in couples counseling, I have people come in and say, we never argue. And that's actually not a big indicator of if it's a successful relationship or not. It's, hey, can I really be seen here? Can I bring up conflict? Can I communicate my needs, which is what we talked about in one of the other YouTube lives? Can I communicate my needs in this relationship? And that's huge. That's really important, because then your boundaries are respected and honored. And that's huge. Again, that fence is not to keep everybody out. It's actually to communicate your needs, your wants, your desires in a way that shows them where the gate is to come in, that you're worth it, to respect that. Number 3, to make time and space for positive interactions. So again, that space word, but positive interactions, how much more life-giving you would have. And imagine what you would have if some of these boundaries were adhered to or respected. If you were able to, if your gut told you no, and instead of saying yes, you said no, would you have more free time? Would you have more capacity, more time for your family, more time to exercise, more time to work on yourself, more time for friends, that sort of thing? And so again, go back, every yes has a no. And number 4, to set limits in a relationship in a way that's healthy. And again, someone in that chat box said setting healthy limits. So what does that mean? That sounds so great. Yes, everything has a limit. I mean, think of, I'm having some tea, but imagine if I had coffee all day in this mug. Like, I need a healthy limit, because too much caffeine, there's a boundary that gets crossed where then your body gets all kind of out of whack, your anxiety spikes, you're jittery. There's a limit, there's a boundary in place. The boundary line is drawn, and that's okay. And everybody has different ones. Like, every body is unique, everybody is unique, every boundary is unique. So I do want to encourage that. There's some healthy principles, but it is really unique to you and your season too. Okay, before we go on to different types of boundaries, does anyone have any questions or any comments or anything that resonates with them? Is there any other thing that you would add to those tips or to the why, like why it's important to set boundaries? And again, it's not as an exhaustive list, so we'd love to hear what comes up for you. Like, why is it important to have boundaries in your life? Or what other tips would you add on there? Oh, Kristen says, for your peace of mind. Yeah, that is a huge why. Like, imagine what it would bring to your life of having this boundary. And oftentimes that just starts with idealizing it or getting curious about it and thinking, oh, even if you think to yourself, oh, I can't do that. Like, your first is like to dismiss it, but just get curious about it. Like, oh, if I were able to tell my boss what I really thought, or to really communicate a need to my spouse or my mom or my mother-in-law, if I were to put healthy boundaries around work, what would that look like? If you could just start to get curious about that, that would be one of the first ones. Jennifer, for my sanity and peace. So peace is a big one. Yes. Tiffany, so I can be myself instead of conforming. And just even getting curious about, how am I conforming? How am I not adhering to one of my values here and, conforming to those around me, or saying yes when I really mean no? This doesn't actually really serve me. I'm just trying to look like all the lawns in my neighborhood or whatever. And back to that house and the lawn analogy. Oh, Sarah says, so we do not have burnout. Totally. Because empty cups cannot pour. And if we keep saying yes and we don't have any replenishing space of healthy boundaries, we're going to burn out. We're going to be so resentful, so frustrated, so angry, and just so exhausted. Sarah, to save my relationships, I tend to not set a boundary and then say I'm done and cut someone out. Yeah, it's like you've hit that ending point and it's like it's beyond repair. I don't even know where to begin. So you're just done. We hit a breaking point. Again, kind of back to that rubber band, that would be to the tense part. And it's just, then it snaps and it's done. Oh, Jennifer, better sleep. Yes, oftentimes with boundaries, when a boundary's been crossed, whether that person knows they have or unknowingly crosses your boundary, and it feels like there's been an invasion, like they've stepped into your property, that could be your time. That could be a friend asking too much of you, or texting you too much, or expecting too much of you, or anything like that. Isn't it at night when we lay in bed and we think about it and we go over and over and over and over in our heads, and we may not say anything? And so that's why it keeps happening, that they don't maybe know a boundary's been crossed, or again, their need is being met. And so they're actually benefiting from our lack of boundaries. And I bet our sleep would improve if we started to enforce some boundaries, put some protective measures around ourselves. And I think that mom and dad are the hardest to set boundaries with because I know how hard they worked to raise me. Totally. And I love university students. I mean, this is true for that age group because it's often their first time gaining independence, experiencing who they are on their own, moving away from home. That physical boundary, that physical space helps give that mental and emotional space to come up and capacity to increase. So they start to explore these. But this can be like through adult people. You could be a CEO of a very successful business and experience this. It's like, oh, but to my mom and dad, I have to do this, or I have to pay for everything, or I have to do that. Oftentimes you see this with marriages, with children and the in-laws and all of that. And these are big ones. They are the hardest people. I will have to say the people closest to you are the hardest to set boundaries with because it can feel unloving, but it's actually really loving to yourself. And it gives meaningful relationship and authenticity. Because if they do really love you, they're going to want the best for you, even if it's a little bit more inconvenient or they don't completely understand or agree, or maybe they do agree and they didn't even realize what they were doing. Sarah says balance. Yes, if I had balance, or my why, I would have a little bit more balance in my life. And when I work with people to set boundaries, I encourage them to think of all these positives, because the positive thing is going to motivate us, not the negative of, come on, what's wrong with you? Why haven't you spoken up to your mom and told her this? Nobody does well with that. That would not make me want to speak up. I would want to really gain that balance or that peace that a lot of you have shared about of, wow, if you had that, like, what would that look like in your life? What would you be doing? How frequently would you be seeing that person? And so forth, like really getting curious, painting a really good picture. Pamela, working in ministry, I struggle with communication with leadership. Okay, Pamela, oh, I'm so glad you said this, because boundaries. So Dr. Henry Cloud, he is a huge psychologist in the United States and across the world, like so many conferences and books and speaking. He comes from a ministry background and he targets like churches and the faith-based communities, because isn't that so true? It's like, have a servant heart, like serve people, love people well. And I think all of us want to be good people, but there's something different in those communities. And so I work a ton in that, and it's such a good one. I hope you check out his resources. You probably already maybe have heard of him too, but it is such a hard one, especially with leadership, like where you feel, and that's for anyone, when there's a power hierarchy, it's like, oh, I can't set a boundary with my boss or this person above me, which is often why it's hard to do it with parents. But you're deserving of it. You're very deserving of it. It's a type of self-respect. And there's seasons of life that changes, like of a child and a teen, an adult child. There are seasons, and boundaries can change, and you can teach people how you want to be treated. So now I'm going to bring up some types of boundaries. So just to paint a good picture, we're going to go with what are physical boundaries, and then emotional and intellectual boundaries. So physical. So we talked about space a little bit before, like that could actually, when you're getting really heated in an argument with a friend or a spouse or someone, a child, even like getting a physical boundary, like going in another room. That's a physical, like providing a barrier between you and an intruding force. So that's like a Band-Aid, and it protects from bacteria on a wound. So think of it like that. It protects. There's a barrier to get through. It's hard. You can't just get in and out as anytime you want. There's a barrier, and you have to realize that. And it's actually, you can see it. So if we applied that philosophy to emotional and intellectual boundaries, so our mental capacity, our emotional capacity, it protects our sense of self-esteem and our ability to separate our feelings from others. So like a Band-Aid, there's a barrier. There's like a physical separation here. I'm in the other room, or I have that boundary over protecting, helping me heal in a certain way. The same is true for emotional and mental boundaries. And it protects your sense of self-esteem and self-worth. And so when you have a weak emotional boundary or some weak emotional boundaries, it's like getting caught in the midst of a hurricane with no protection. It's so overwhelming. Your hair is a disarray. There's things flying at you. You don't know up from down or where you're at. And it's so chaotic, so overwhelming. And it feels like you have no control of your life. And that's often when people say is, I feel like I am not in control of my life, that someone else is controlling it and I have no say. And that can be really unsettling and really dispowering for us. And we need to take that power back. And small steps really help us take power back over our schedule, sitting down over the week and saying, okay, these are my values. This is what I want to get in this week. I want to see a friend for coffee and I want to go to the gym 3 times a week and I want to have a date night or whatever. Let's say those are your values. Sitting down, making a boundary of your schedule and putting them in. That's an act of boundaries. That's honoring that need and that self-worth there. And when that's crossed, when you say yes to work, even though, oh, I made plans with a friend, oh, I'll just cancel. That's actually not listening or not adhering to one of your boundaries, one of your values, and that's been crossed. And so you could say yes to work and say no to that friend and then feel like you have no control, or I had to, or they made me. Nobody can make you do anything. You are in control of you. And so we need to see what our values are so that we can make boundaries to protect that. So that's really important, a good picture to think about too. So let's go through some types of healthy and unhealthy boundaries. Unhealthy boundaries. So healthy and unhealthy. Let's look at unhealthy first, because I think, well, we'll resonate with all of these, but sometimes it's just good to get that picture and then end on that healthy. And then as I'm sharing these, please just be able to share in the chat box, like what you're seeing. Yes, good. Okay, so unhealthy boundaries. What are some of these? Often we see this with people sharing too much too soon, or at the other end of the spectrum, closing yourself off and not expressing your needs and wants. So I think we're all around those types of people, both of them. And maybe we are one of those or have been one of those at one point or another in our life, and you're not stuck there. You can change out of that. But somebody who shares too much too soon, like there's really no boundary, there's no filter. You're like, wow, I just met you 5 minutes ago. Now, this is different in counseling because this is a safe place. But if it's just a person you meet at the store or a get together, that can be a little bit too much too soon, that they don't have good boundaries, that they're looking to unload on you. Or on the other side of not opening up at all. Like you could know this person for years and you really don't know even their favorite color or anything like their hopes and dreams and things like that. So it's closed off or too much. Another type of unhealthy boundary could be feeling responsible for others' happiness. So again, out of guilt, in that mowing the lawn example of the 2 houses of, I feel bad, or it's a nice thing to do. It made them really happy. I've got to do this. We often see this when there's a role reversal between a parent and a child, of you feeling responsible for your parent's happiness. And that's not okay. You actually aren't responsible for their happiness. You're just responsible for you. Another type of unhealthy boundary is an inability to say no for fear of rejection or abandonment. So you're the yes person. You say yes to everything. Yes, I can do it. Yes, I'll be there. The friend that reaches out all the time. Yes, yes, call me anytime, message me anytime. And we want to be caring, but we can't be enabling. And if you can't say no, then you're not teaching people how they can say no or have health boundaries in their own life, and things like that. And it's often based out of this fear of rejection. Like if I don't, even though I don't want to, if I don't do it, they're going to leave me as a friend or as a partner or in my workplace. I'm replaceable. So it's a really deep fear of that abandonment, but that self-worth is a huge component of it. Another type of unhealthy boundary would be a weak sense of your own identity. You base how you feel about yourself on how others treat you. So we see this in helping professions a lot, is I get invigorated, or my self-worth or my identity, in my role as a caregiver. And so I'm going to enable this victim mentality in someone else so that I can come be the savior or the rescuer or the caregiver. And you kind of get stuck in these these roles. And it's a lack of boundaries at times. Another type of unhealthy boundary would be disempowerment. So you allow others to make decisions for you. Consequently, you feel powerless and do not take responsibility for your own life. So we often call this a victim mentality of they made me do it, or I had no choice. And I just encourage people to start by changing the language there. You always have a choice. No one has that much power to make you do something in your own life or make you feel a certain way. And I hear that a lot, like, he made me feel this way. And I'm like, wow, he has a lot of power over your life, a lot of power to make you feel a way. And it's kind of equated to allowing someone to live rent free in your head. So let's say you have an argument with a friend or your mom or mother-in-law or a coworker. Oh, if only I could say this to my boss. And you carry that conversation around with you everywhere you go in your head, never saying anything, never verbalizing it or communicating a boundary. And all you do is just replay it in your head. And one time this happened and I asked someone, wow, like, what did they say when you said that to them? And it like kind of shocked her back. Well, I've never said that to them. I can't say that to them. I said, wow, well, it's going to keep going on in your head and you're allowing that person to live rent free and come with you wherever you go. And it's not that person, that other person who's hurting. It's you. It's that disempowerment of you, of that victim mentality. It's literally soul and energy sucking. And so pay attention to that too. So again, at some time or another, we probably all experience these things, and it's good to know what maybe unhealthy boundaries are. So then we can know what those healthy boundaries look like. If we have a clear picture of that, then we can go forward towards that. So there's unhealthy boundaries, there's some healthy boundaries. Let's see what those are. And I'd love to hear again, as I'm going through, I'm just going to take a quick nod through the chat box. Are there any other ones that you would add to it? Some free rent in the housing market. Oh, that's funny. Add to it. Please type in the chat box if there's other unhealthy boundaries that you've experienced or see, add them. I love hearing what you guys are experiencing, as well as any healthy boundaries too. That's going to be a good one to kind of end on that high note, but it's good to have a clear picture of what we're working towards, because otherwise it's just overwhelming. It's like, where do I even start? So I hope these ones will be really, really powerful for you. So healthy boundaries have high self-esteem and self-respect. So again, it's honoring to who you are, that respecting your time, your resources, your effort, your values, your body, your energy, your wants, needs, desires, respecting that. Healthy boundaries also share personal information gradually in a mutually sharing and trusting relationship. So little by little, that, oh, I shared a little bit here, I was vulnerable, and that person really honored that. There was a reason I felt I could be vulnerable and share a little bit, and they really were careful with that. They protected that. They respected that. So I think I can share a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. They share with me too. So it's not a one-way street. So it's mutual, that beneficial relationship. Healthy boundaries also could look like protection, protect physical and emotional space from intrusion. So what does that mean? That could be just, has anybody ever come into your home or your space, like your physical little bubble, and the atmosphere just shifts? You're like, ooh, I can like feel something, like an energy shift. And that's true. Like as humans, we co-regulate. They're called mirror neurons. It's scientific, but there's something about that. And that's a boundary that's going off in you. And that could be a false alarm. Like, hey, there's nothing actually wrong here. You're in your own head or the story you're telling yourself. But sometimes it's an intuition of those mirror neurons. If that person's really chaotic and disorganized and overwhelmed and angry, and I can feel that coming into my space, and I don't want that. That's trying to tell you that alarm is a good thing going off in you, saying, hey, put up a boundary. You don't want to be around that person right now, especially if you've just had a really long day at work and don't have capacity of just saying, oh, you know what? Maybe you're at the grocery store and you can remove yourself from that kind of disgruntled, angry person of just saying, okay, I'm going to go grab something over here, and then just change a line. That could be separating yourself. Have an equal partnership where responsibility and power are shared. So again, it's equal partnership, not that power hierarchy that we often feel with unhealthy boundaries. And that could be with a parent-child, even an adult child and their parent, boss and an employee, but trying to get that equal partnership, especially in a relationship or a friendship. That's huge. Healthy boundaries. Okay, tip, be assertive. Confidently and truthfully say yes or no and be okay when others say no to you. And I think that's a hard one. Like, adhere someone else's boundaries too. Like, your friend might say that of like, I'm free at this time, and it doesn't work for you. And you can get annoyed of, oh, she's being really rigid. She's only free at 10 a.m. on Friday. And you can get annoyed. That's okay. Let that come up, but also say, well, I see that she's trying to, have capacity and boundaries around her time right now. And even though that's a little disappointing, I'm happy that she's trying to practice that. I practice that too. Let's see. Healthy boundaries also separate your needs, thoughts, feelings, and desires from others. It recognizes that your boundaries and needs are different from others. And there's different seasons too, that maybe you've been in a similar season where someone has felt that way and now they're setting boundaries and it's different for you. But you're trying to adhere to that and respect that. Or likewise, you're in a new season. You've just moved, you just started a new job. You don't have the same capacity and your boundaries are going to shift and change. And that's okay too. You're in a new relationship. This is a big one. You've had a child. There's a big transition. There's going to be boundaries around to protect that. So you do that transition period well. And finally, healthy boundaries empower yourself to make healthy choices and take responsibility for yourself. And so there is a concept that it may not be your fault of if something bad's happened to you, but it now is your responsibility to do something about it. So it helps us stay out of that victim mentality, to take ownership, to take power back, to put some healthy boundaries in. So I'll pop over to the chat box, see what resonates with y'all of unhealthy or healthy boundaries and what that looks like. Yeah. So Jennifer, definitely afraid of coming off as mean. Yeah, that's a really normal fear. And I would just encourage you, like, that is a that's a barrier. Oh, sorry, I forgot to do the barriers of boundaries. Fear of coming off as mean, coming off as harsh, fear of rejection or abandonment. Like, if I say this and you don't like it, you're going to leave me. Those are really the biggest ones that we have of barriers to them, or I don't want to upset them, or the guilt. That's why I give into it. But then you're upsetting yourself. So nobody wins. They may win, but you don't, or feel better. Not necessarily win or lose, but then you don't win. So those barriers are really important to recognize too. And it doesn't necessarily mean to stop, but it is a barrier that you're feeling, or it's a discomfort. It doesn't mean that it's insurmountable. Tiffany says, my best friend makes me feel like she's always judging me in my house, etc. And so again, just that word choice, like, she makes me feel, just maybe even talking to her about that. Like, again, going back to those 5 tips, like, that's a great point. And I'm going to welcome questions here now too. But the 5 tips, like, be clear about what you want for setting and enforcing boundaries. Be clear. Maybe she doesn't know that that's bothering you. And there's, again, that power hierarchy. There's not the equal relationship sense, even that invisible that you're sensing, and you're just feeling spoken down to. So again, that picture of the house with the white picket fence, but she can't just keep jumping the fence to come in. You got to show her where that gate is. So be clear about what you want, be direct, and don't apologize for your needs. Expect resistance and don't let it deter you. Set limits. That's okay. That's going to be an ongoing process. There's got to be some limitations. Maybe when you're feeling stressed out, you don't have that person over. And finally, 5 boundaries are for your own well-being, not to control others. And maybe that's a mantra that we have to write on a sticky note and have around our house for a little bit. Boundaries are for my well-being, not for others. That can be a really good reminder. So of these things that we've talked about today, of these 5 tips really to set in on and to set and enforce boundaries, what are some examples of unhealthy? What are some examples of healthy boundaries? What are some barriers? Why is it important? Does anyone have any other comments or questions? I would love to hear what resonates with you, or if you have anything else to add. Ooh, great question coming in from Sarah. How would you set boundaries with someone who is super sensitive? It's like, I would rather just agree than have to deal with the emotions. That can be hard, which is probably why it's still occurring. And maybe that's almost this manipulation tactic that that person uses, because they know some people are overbearing and loud, and they know that they can make you do what they want you to do or manipulate you based on that aggressive behavior. Other people use like that passive guilt or deep sensitivity to still manipulate. And again, going back to some of those tips about it, like, these are for you, not for them. And especially if that person's an adult, they're their own person. And if they're that sensitive, it's not just you. There's other stuff going on. There's other triggerings, and it's about you and maybe that boundary, but it's not about you and that boundary. It's about a whole lot of other stuff. And I think it does take a lot of weighing and balancing of, okay, I could just keep going how I'm going and not say anything and just agree. And where would that lead me? Like, play that movie out in your head. Am I okay with that? Or do I feel like I need to speak up? And I coined this term, I don't know if it's real or not, but I like to use it. I call them formal and informal boundaries. But an informal boundary is one where you're not very direct about it or clear, but there is a barrier still. And a boundary is made, think about it, it's a barrier. You bump up to it and you don't like it, but you know where the boundary line is, so you back up. It doesn't mean that it feels good. And boundaries don't always feel good, and that's okay. And if that person's sensitive, they've got to work through some of that. That's not yours to take on. But an informal boundary is like where maybe somebody's texting you a lot and it's through your workday and it's just too much. You don't like it. So you just don't reply. You just ignore them. And you hope that you not engaging is enough of a boundary. They bump into, they don't like it, so they just don't go anymore and they stop. They kind of get the hint. Most people like to start with informal boundaries because they don't feel as formal, as stiff and harsh and all of that. But sometimes if they're not respected, you need to go to a formal boundary. And a formal boundary is those very clear, very specific, hey, I need to talk to you. And I'm working during these times. It's really disruptive or overwhelming when you're messaging me all the time. I'm off at 5. That's when you can message me. Or maybe I'm off at 5 and I can message you then. So again, you're taking kind of that power back and giving the parameters of the boundaries. Kristen, I didn't realize I needed boundaries with my husband too. We have the disempowerment part of unhealthy boundaries. Great information. Thank you. Yes. And this is actually really common in dating and marriage, like any relationship where there could be a power dynamic, because we're human. And there's different seasons for that too, of, hey, my time, I don't feel like you're respecting my time or valuing that or honoring that. And that could be a slight adjustment or a more sit down conversation. But again, it can actually be such a bonding and connecting conversation because you're being authentic, you're respecting yourself. And especially in spouses or close friends, if there's a certain way you want to be treated, be specific about it, but also model that. You get to teach someone how to treat you. You get to teach someone where the gate is to get access into you. And I think that's really important, that it's okay to kind of reassess. And oftentimes a good indicator that a boundary has been crossed is, again, that anger or resentment, frustration, anxiety, overwhelm. Oftentimes it's anger or that resentment. And it's like this hot red feeling. It's like a red alarm that's going off. And it feels like somebody's invaded your space, like metaphorically or physically, like they're just way too close, or they're just crossing over into your time or effort and just too much. It's just too much. And so your alarm system goes off, and that just is telling you, hey, there's been an invasion, so to speak, and a boundary has been crossed. But then you get to decide what to do about it. You could either say nothing and it might be crossed again because they may not know, or they may have benefited from it. Or you could speak up and say, hey, when this happened, it really did bother me. And I just want to be honest with you. I do want us to have a really good relationship. Yeah. Yeah, it's often the people we're closest to, hey, that is the hardest to have boundaries with, or how to communicate them, because it can feel unloving, and it's not. It actually can give way to the most life-giving relationships out there, and balance. Like so many people have said, balance, peace. Imagine what you'd get by having some of these protective measures in place. I go in and talk to workforces, like big corporations and organizations a lot. And as practical as it is, it's sometimes not only around their coworkers, but around the work-life balance of, okay, I'm not going to reply to emails after 5 p.m. Like now it's 5 to 10 p.m. is my time that I get to have control over, and ownership and power over, and do what I want, what's important to me. And then I'll get back to emails at 9 a.m. And so if there's people messaging you, you sometimes maybe that's their free time and you don't have to reply. They'll be totally fine. Or you could say, hey, I'm trying to not reply to emails after 5 and I'll get back to it at 9 a.m. Thank you. Or you put an automatic Sunday thing on the email. But that's a practical one in the workplace too. And so boundaries happen everywhere, not just in parent-child relationships or friendships or romantic relationships, marriages, but in workplaces too, in ministry, in community, in anywhere. And they're not a bad thing. And I think the more that we talk about them, the more comfortable we get about them, the more that we notice, okay, where are my boundaries? Where is it crossed? Where is it not? Where is that adhered to? How can I respect someone else's? And I just encourage you to lean in one of those tips. You don't have to do all of them, but say, what would make the biggest difference in my life to bring peace to my life or balance to my life right now? And try to lean into that. So if you have any other questions, please go ahead and type them in. And I just really want to thank you for coming on today. And hopefully you've learned a little bit about setting and enforcing boundaries. The biggest takeaway, it's hard to do. Everyone finds it hard. It doesn't mean it's wrong, and you are worth it. Imagine what you get by doing it. And I'd encourage you to think about that. So thank you for joining us. And if you weren't on live with us, you can come and listen to the recording and see the chat box. And we'll see you again next Monday as well here, as well as tune into our other YouTube lives and different topics too. And I hope they encourage you.